What's going on, my fellow Belters? So much to get to tonight, I don't even really know where to begin, but I'm back to review Episode 6 of Season 3 of The Expanse. As most of you are probably already aware, Syfy announced the sad news last week that they were dropping the show, The Expanse. And as I did a little research, I started to understand why, because Syfy has the rights to the show on TV, but it seems like the majority of the audience that loves The Expanse is watching it on other platforms. Internationally, people are watching on Netflix. Domestically, a lot of people are watching on Amazon. And so the bulk of the eyeballs watching the show, Syfy wasn't even really getting to reap those benefits. But luckily, Alcon Television Group, who creates the show, is determined for the show to survive at all costs. And there's been a really beautiful, active campaign trying to seduce either Amazon or Netflix into coming on board as the main distributor of the show. There was a plane flying for hours over Amazon Studios in California yesterday with a Save the Expanse banner behind it. And online, a lot of really vocal celebrity fans like Patton Oswalt or luminaries like George R.R. Martin, they came out and offered a very full-throated defense of the show. I mean, this is a show with, I think, roughly a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So while the people who know the show love it, and critically it's very highly praised, sadly the audience for hardcore science fiction, and this is as hardcore as science fiction gets, is sadly just much smaller than a lot of us would like to believe. But at this point, Netflix and Amazon both have such enormously deep pockets and such enormous reach. I mean, the amount of original content that Netflix cranks out on a weekly basis now is just prodigious. So fingers crossed the story of The Expanse on TV will have a happy ending. And I feel like tonight's episode was one of the perfect episodes to make a case for why this show should stick around. It's one of those episodes that was so exciting, I had to watch it while standing up with my arms crossed, and I was just kind of nodding my head and taking it in. But I was just too amped up, and granted, I was a little over-caffeinated as well, but I couldn't stay in my seat. I had to be more actively engaged while watching it. And while there were a few major departures from the book Caliban's War, one of which I really liked, one of which I did not, but I'll get to that toward the end of my recap and review. But this episode could not have come along at a better time, right when fans are really planting their flag and screaming the battle cry for why this show needs to continue. I feel like Immolation was the show putting its best foot forward. So this episode wasted absolutely no time whatsoever diving right into the thick of the action. We open up with Alex emptying out everything that the Rossi has, trying to stop all the hybrids that have been launched into space, presumably with Mars as the main target. And there's always just something incredibly exhilarating and beautiful about the way this show depicts gunfire. It's almost like it's a very fluid thing, and it just looks absolutely incredible. But some of the hybrids get hit, one of which crashes directly into the Agatha King, where all hell breaks loose. Now, I really enjoyed the events on the Agatha King this episode. However, for budgetary constraints that I totally understand, it didn't quite capture what happens in the novel, where the scene that unfolds aboard the Agatha King is basically like a sci-fi nightmare combined with Dawn of the Dead. And I totally understand that it's incredibly expensive to have 300 or 400 protomolecule infected humans roaming about, but what was interesting in the book was that as they were infected, they were much smarter this time around than they were in the previous example that we saw in season 1. So while the hardcore fanboy me was a little bit sad to see that missing, I totally understood. We do get a little taste of those chapters from the book where Kotyar gets saved by a girl who's being attacked by one of these roaming protomolecule zombies, but before she even has a chance to free Kotyar, we see on her leg that she's been infected. And if you're infected with a protomolecule, that is a death sentence. Luckily, she does free Kotyar before she succumbs to this horrible parasite. Meanwhile, back on Io, we get some great character-defining beats, we get some great show-stopping moments. As all the lab rats and Jules Pierre Mao are debating what to do, the main lab rat suggests, let's release the one hybrid that we have to buy us some time so we can escape, which leads to this ultimate showdown between Bobby and the hybrid. And it's something we've been building toward since the halfway point of season 2, when we saw Bobby and all of her allies get absolutely wiped out on Ganymede. And Bobby, when she's suited up, is basically like Iron Man. But what she really reminded me of was the game Fallout 4. I absolutely loved and adored Fallout 4. It's one of Bethesda's best games in years. But when you're playing in Fallout 4, if you assemble one of these gigantic suits, the POV that you have, or the user interface, was almost identically to what we saw Bobby having on her own screen, especially when ammunition's going low in certain elements or certain appendages are getting weak or damaged. So that was a cool flashback, but it was also just a dynamite fight scene as she's running around and she's basically running interference so that the rest of the crew of the Rossi can find May. But speaking of character-defining moments, one of my favorite moments that absolutely made me crack up was when Prax went into full Dirty Harry mode at one point. He says, almost like Clint Eastwood, "They shot at us, they made the choice." And this is a guy who was basically a botanist his entire life until fairly recently, until he and Amos became the best buds in the solar system. And later in the episode, Prax even calls out Amos as his favorite person in the whole world, which once again just made me crack out that in the middle of this solar system threatening, like extinction level event, you had this great little bromance, this like buddy cop movie. And the emphasis on their friendship has definitely been one of the surprises of season 3, because that's something that's unique to the show, not from the books. In the books, sometimes Alex, Naomi, and Amos can kind of get sidelined a little bit in order to have Jim Holden take center stage. And so it's always interesting trying to see how the showrunners will address that by giving them things to do. And the mutual respect that grows between Amos and Prax over the course of the season has been the perfect way to keep Amos in the mix. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that for me, the one big gaping flaw of the show is always the scenes that take place on Earth, and this episode was no exception. However, we at least got to see some resolution with the Aaron Wright situation. Secretary General finally sees the footage where Aaron Wright reveals himself to be a traitor, and Anna gets to gloat in his face a little bit as the soldiers come in and arrest Aaron Wright for treason. Once again, I don't know what the creative solution is to make the scenes on Earth more interesting. I just feel like the show is way more interesting when it's dealing with things that are happening out in the belt. So one of the main bits of drama in this episode is the fact that the launch controls of the hybrid have been passed over from Io to the Agatha King, and obviously the Agatha King is currently being converted into this giant floating chunk of protomolecule nastiness. And Alex knows that without those codes, Mars is totally screwed, so he and Naomi decide to hop on the Razorback and fly up there and try to find a way to redirect those torpedoes. And this is where the show really deviates from the novel, because in the novel, Holden essentially risks his own life to go aboard the Agatha King by himself. And that's what leads to this incredible chase scene where he's being chased by hundreds of nasty protomolecule zombies. But I have to say, this is a change that I appreciated, because once again, Alex and Naomi are awesome characters. They need stuff to do, and by giving a few of Holden's actions over to those characters, it's a great way to keep them relevant. Granted, if you're a diehard Holden fan, you might be like, well, wait a second, I really like Holden. I like when he gets to be the hero. But in that this show is an ensemble cast, it's important to keep Naomi and Alex relevant to the story. So they basically take over Holden's role, going up to the Agatha King and trying to redirect things. The problem is that Kotyar, who is now also infected, decides to blow up the entire ship, which is a very noble gesture of self-sacrifice, but it doesn't give Naomi time to redirect the hybrids, where she finally concocts the ultimate brilliant scheme of bringing in Fred Johnson with his nukes to take out all the hybrids before they can land on Mars. It's basically a way of Fred Johnson to assert himself in a way where he shows that not only is the belt now on equal power to Mars and Earth, that he can be a very strong, vocal, important voice when it comes to trying to establish peace between all these various factions. So while Bobby nearly gets taken out in this epic battle with the hybrid, she does finally manage to win by basically unloading everything that she has into the back of the creature's head and just blasting out its brains, and it collapses dead. We get a very loving reunion between Prax and May. They finally find the kids, and this doctor's doing everything in his power, including murdering some girl, in order to try and save his own skin. And the doctor's pleading for his life, and Prax is looking down the barrel of his gun, about to take him out, when finally Amos leans in and says, "You're not that guy." And he lets Prax walk away with his daughter, and then Amos, in one of his best character-defining beats, looks right at the doctor and says, "I am that guy." And it's not like he shoots him with a single bullet. I think he blasts him with a shotgun because there's this enormous burst of blood on the wall. In any case, he lays the doctor flat, and it was a very satisfying moment. Meanwhile, Holden, he finds Joel Pierre Mao. He turns him over to Christian. So everybody got something to do in this. I mean, if you're a giant Christian Avasarala fan, you might think that she didn't have quite enough to do in this. But she will, in the end, get to be the one who lays claim for having brought Joel Pierre Mao back to Earth to face justice. Something that's been missing from the show for a long time, I think since like the earliest episodes of season 1, is some of the SEX that initially made the show so famous. However, we do get a nice reunion between Naomi and Jim Holden, All's Forgiven, and we get this strikingly beautiful shot of them in profile lying in bed together. And without getting too crude on this channel, I'll just say Dominique Tipper, who plays Naomi, she is incredibly easy on the eyes. So the episode draws to a close with a pretty giant cliffhanger as we see the culmination of the ongoing events on Venus, where the protomolecule basically gathers up all the resources that it needs, and this giant ship essentially that it's been constructing almost looks like a giant whitehead. It's like a big giant zit being popped on the surface of the planet as it floats up, and Amos has the perfect reaction while he's watching it on TV. I hate to be the one to criticize the show, however, I will say this. The passage in the book dealing with that event is my favorite passage of the book that I've read, and so I was a little bit disappointed just by the way that unfolded. In the novel Caliban's War, a lot of ships are around waiting to see what's going to happen, and a lot of these ships are kind of brushed aside as it comes up. It's almost like a giant starfish initially coming up from the planet, but as it takes off and goes into space, it's almost like a squid zapping off, like leaving its tentacles behind it. It's just... the image was described so beautifully and so hauntingly when I read it in the book. I had to stop, take it in, and I just kept rereading those few paragraphs over and over again. I was completely blown away. Once again, I totally understand why, for budgetary reasons, they probably couldn't show the scene as written in the novel. So that was my one little bittersweet moment this episode that didn't quite capture my favorite moment in all the books, the way that I had pictured it in my imagination. But that is minor nitpicking on my part. If you've read Caliban's War, you know there's one more giant major teaser that comes after that, but I'm not going to say what that is because they're probably saving it for the very next episode. But in the teaser that they did show, we see that David Strathairn is joining the show, and I think David Strathairn is a very, very fine actor, and he will be a welcome addition to the rest of the cast. So all around, awesome episode. This is the perfect bit of ammunition we need, making a case for why The Expanse should continue. We've got 7 more episodes to enjoy this season, so hopefully between now and then, anyone out there with a blog or a YouTube channel or just a giant social media presence in general can make a very strong case for why The Expanse kicks ass. Definitely encourage every nerdy friend you have to go back to season 1 and start from the beginning. Although it seems like the thing we need most is for people to watch the show on Syfy as it airs. I'm no expert on the corporate affairs at Syfy, but it seems like that ship might have sailed. But I think if we see a giant spike in numbers across the board between now and the next 7 episodes, some giant major platform is going to recognize this enormous opportunity to pick up a very cool show. So fingers crossed, cooler heads will prevail, and we will get our season 4 of Expanse sometime next year. But I can't thank you enough for watching my recap and review. I always appreciate the feedback. I always appreciate the comments, especially when people point out things like I kept calling the character Southern, and I have to apologize because I was born and raised in the South here in the United States, and maybe it was just wishful thinking on my part that his name was Southern. In any case, I always appreciate the corrections. I need all the help I can get. But if you want to talk more, you can hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax, or once again, just leave a comment in the comments below, and I'll be back at y'all tomorrow night to review the new movie, Deadpool 2, a movie I'm very fired up to see. But thanks again for supporting my channel, but as always, onwards and upwards.